Vigilance. I'm the director for the Rosenthal Theater here at City Arts. So if this is your first time coming to City Arts and to our theater, welcome. We are so excited and proud and inspired that this meeting is happening here today. This is the first of 4 meetings. The Rosenthal Theater here is a place to be a resource for your vision, for your inspiration, for your conversations. And so this is perfect alignment with what we love to be able to support here in the theater as well as throughout our campus here at City Arts. So I welcome you and thank you. And if you have any questions or want more information about our organization, there's a bunch of stuff outside, but all will be here for the evening as well. And if you have any bright ideas that you want to share in our theater, please let us know because we'd love to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolores. Dolores also has been involved in the development of the First Responder Tales idea, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But thank you, Dolores, for hosting and welcoming us and making us feel at home. We really, really appreciate it. I'm Teresa Chavez, by the way. We're not related, but, you know.
Just join.
We're in the same family. So we always make a joke that we're primas, you know, we're cousins, but, you know. But anyway, I am the producing artistic director of About Productions. We create original interdisciplinary theater works and educational programs, and we are in our 25th year as a company. We're celebrating 25 this year. And in the year of our 25th anniversary, we've chosen to self-reflect and consider the field that we're part of, how we will survive the next stage of our company's life, and what will pass down to the next generation of theater makers and art creators. Out of that reflection came an idea for a new frame, First Responders, and the basis for the Symposia series, First Responder Tales. As you'll see this evening, we really want to make this a conversation, a dialogue with you. We have this idea, this frame that we want to offer to you as a gift to the community to begin to define what this frame might mean for us all of us. I'll give you the working definition in a second, but many of you in the room here are starting out in your practice. Some of you have been working on this type of practice for many years. It's a wonderful mix. I can see it's a wonderful mix, so I'm really, really happy for that. Young and old schoolers, young schoolers. So again, to get the conversation going, we started with this initial definition, which I'm going to read so that we can, in a sense, be on the same page. And also, before that, I want to say that we're reframing so we can better understand and articulate our value and how integral we are to the health and well-being of our communities. And so with that, the initial definition of the first responder. First responders are experimenters, inventors, and trendsetters who often blur lines between art, education, and activism. Entrenched in their self-defined communities, first responders create work and programs in response to the community's interests, issues, and concerns. Like neighborhood health clinics that dot the landscape throughout LA, they provide services and vital programs that sustain a particular community and contribute to its welfare and provide safe spaces to connect and collaborate with individuals and groups, to explore stories, histories, and frontline issues that are deemed important by the community itself. Importantly, they have chosen to work at the scale that allows them to have this direct engagement. So I know that's a little bit of a mouthful, and you know, again, we can offer it out again as we get into small groups and go into this. But I want to just say there has been a process. Again, there's a committee, an advisory committee that we pulled together, and many of those folks are here tonight, including myself, obviously, Dolores, and some folks I want to point out who are going to be part of the top of the evening. Leilani Chan, where's Leilani? There she is. The founder and artistic director of Teata Productions. We just met Dolores. Terrence McFarland, the chief executive officer of LA Stage Alliance, and he was actually supposed to be here tonight, but he had a medical emergency. So we're sending him good vibes, and he'll be here hopefully for the round 2. And as Dolores said, this is one of 4 of the series. Rose Portillo, the associate director of About and Mark Valdez, executive director of the network of ensembles. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So Mark, who's in the front, and Danielle Griselle, who is the executive director of Arts for LA. All of these companies, if you're unfamiliar with them, you should definitely check them out. They're doing different things in the field. Some are service organizations, arts advocates, but all of them are supporting the work of this process that we're starting this evening. I also want to introduce a couple of my board members who are here. Chris Anthony. Where's Chris? Shakespeare Center, LA. Sorry about that. And Tomas Benitez. He is the LA County Arts Commissioner, among other fabulous things that he does in the world. Let's see. So with that, I think I'm going to thank our sponsors. Our primary sponsor, LA County Arts Commission, and the California A lot of people ask, why is About Productions doing this? And the LA County Arts Commission got it and understood that we have as much right to speak about this and create this new forum. And also About Productions has a 25-year history of being a consortium builder, and we've done lots and lots of things similar to this. So it's part of our history, and they recognize that, so we really appreciate that. So with that, when we started thinking about trying to present a great example of this kind of work, one of the first companies for me that came to mind was the Los Angeles Poverty Department, otherwise known as LAPD. And many of you may be familiar with the company. They are a national treasure. They're definitely an LA treasure. I've known John for many, many years. I'm going to read a formal introduction of their mission statements and that kind of thing. LAPD creates performances and multidisciplinary artworks that connect the experience of people living in poverty to the social forces that shape their lives and communities. Their work expresses the realities, hopes, dreams, and rights of people who live and work in LA's Skid Row. They were founded in 1985, so they're old schoolers like us. John, who's going to speak and introduce his company members, but John directs, performs, and engineers multi-event art projects that have theatrical, installation, public art, and education components. The LAPD is the first performance group in the nation comprised primarily of homeless and formerly homeless folks. And LAPD creates performances that connect lived experience to the social forces that shape the lives and communities of people living in poverty. Malpede has produced projects working with communities throughout the U.S. and in the UK, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Bolivia. And he has many awards, fellowships, etc. I could go on, but some of them, Bessie Award, San Francisco Art Institute's Adeline Kent Award, Ovation Award, City of LA, DCA, COLA Fellowship, and a California Community Foundation Visual Artist Fellowship. So I'm very honored and pleased that John felt community with us in this process and immediately said, I get it and I want to be there and kick this off. So with that, John, thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thanks. So I brought quite some of the LAPD Brain Trust here with me. That's Kevin Michael Key at the far end. performer and lawyer. And Anya Browers. Austin Hines, who came to us as an intern from college and never got out. So, yeah, we're going to talk about small theater companies transforming Los Angeles. And I think that, I'm really happy about Productions is doing this because, oftentimes if you're a small theater company transforming Los Angeles, you better talk about it yourself. You can't rely on somebody else to talk about it because the big theater companies or the big anything, big is big and small is small, okay? That's the way the world is. Big is big, small is small. So if you're small, if you're big, then you create this narrative about life of the world and yourself. And if you're small, you better do the same thing, because otherwise you're not going to be in that other one. You're going to be small in that other one. So that's we try to do that. And for example, the last time we were in this wonderful theater last spring, we did a show called Biggest Recovery Community Anywhere, and it was about this neighborhood, Skid Row, because actually the official boundaries of Skid Row are right here, pretty much Central and 7th, and going up that way. Anyway, how Skid Row was actually the biggest recovery community anywhere. And it happened, I was reading in the Big, that is in the New York Times, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was reading that Delray Beach, Florida, the location of many high-end recovery programs that cost lots of bucks to go to, was actually, had become a big recovery community for good reason, because people who went there and got clean and sober, then, a lot of them stayed in the community and they got jobs there and they opened coffee shops and bookstores and whatever, and it started meetings, and so they felt comfortable there, and so pretty soon there was something like atmosphere, this recovery atmosphere that was there, a very sophisticated kind of thing. And at the time, we were working on a show called Utopia Dystopia, which was about the future of downtown Los Angeles, and our premise was you can't build utopia on the backs of creating a lot of dystopia for other folks. And anyway, so while we were working on the show, I discovered this article, and then we started talking about it, and it got incorporated into a monologue that Kevin had in that show about how, wait a minute, actually, Skid Row is a place with a really sophisticated recovery community. And yeah, even though, the bigs like to take the picture of the guy in the tent with the crack pipe, we know that for every person in that situation, we can name you 10 or 20 people that used to be in that situation who are now, living inside, started running meetings or having a job, or living in Orange County selling real estate, for example. So we decided we were going to make a show about the real biggest recovery community anywhere, which was here, and we made the show here. So a lot of we do a couple things. We have a group that makes shows, right? And we try to make those about different things. They sort of show up just the way that does. Out of the last thing that happened, something that's going on in the neighborhood takes us to the next show. And then most recently, in the last 10 years, we've started making a lot of community-wide events, again, for the same reason that we want to instantiate a different vision of what Skid Row really is, as opposed to what you hear in the bigs. And it didn't used to be that way, actually. When I started working in Skid Row, the bigs were actually very much in favor of creating, bringing services to Skid Row and dealing with issues of extreme poverty. And then later on, their focus sort of drifted in another direction, more to the notion that if you could just displace this community, the long-term residents here, you could make, a gazillion billion dollars. So a lot of our work has been around, making shows, but also doing sort of community-wide events that that instantiate, you know, the assets of the long-standing community that's here, whether that be biggest recovery community anywhere, or walk the talk, maybe. Why don't you tell a little bit about? Hold on a second. Why don't you tell 1 minute about walk the talk, and then we'll watch a 1 minute movie on walk the talk.
I told the movie is 2 minutes, so hopefully I can talk 2 minutes. Well, God, 2 minutes is not very much time. John was just mentioning utopia, dystopia, which was really about the whole gentrification that was happening in 2007. And one of the things that we did in creating that performance was have a lot of community events, glimpses of utopia. There were come-togethers where we asked people who did something really cool in the community, and we invited like 7 or 8 people to do a 10-minute presentation. It could be anything. It could be a lecture, it could be a slideshow, a movie, or just a talk or a song or whatever they did, to highlight all these positive things that are happening in this community. There was one way that we got, and we had 5 such events. So all in all, we had 37 glimpses of utopia. And then we wanted to continue actually that process. So after we made the performance, in 2008 we had a Skid Row History Museum, because we found out so much about the history of Skid Row. And we wanted, with the CRA, which is now gone, we wanted to have plaques of all these faces of these people in the community. So it became a public artwork, which actually never happened because CRA was defunded before we could make the plaques. So we're still trying to do that. But out of that came this project Walk the Talk. Here are the 36 faces of those people, the public artwork we still want to put on. And instead of having the plaques on the streets, so that people know the history of the community, we made this newspaper, and we interviewed all the people, filmed the interviews, transcribed the interviews, and from all these 36 very long interviews, we created 36 short scenes that we performed on the streets in front of the places where those people used to live or are still living or working. But 36 people is a lot of people, so it became a 3-day performance. And there were parades. We got permits from the police to block off the streets. We had a brass band, and we had a mobile microphones and stuff. And so we danced through the streets of Skid Row during Memorial Day weekend for 3 days. And highlighted, performed all the stories of all these people, which was an amazing event. And you know, so many people turned out from, and that's one of the things that we do, is we don't only perform for Skid Row, we also perform outside Skid Row, and we try to mix our audiences. So we have a lot of people from outside Skid Row and inside Skid Row that were dancing in the streets for 3 days, which was really cool. And then we made this newspaper where there was, you know, short bios of all these people and the 3 different routes. So, and we handed them out to everybody in the community, so people could also, you know, learn about the history of their community. And it was now, and actually this year we're doing another one. We're trying to make it a 2-year event that comes back, and so we're in the process of making a new parade, but also we're coming together because, you know, we only do it 1 day this time, but we still want to highlight all these other, and so many people doing wonderful work in the community, so we're continuing the come-togethers leading up to the parade, and so we can highlight as many people as possible.
Can we see our 2-minute movie?
Yeah.
Okay.
homeless outreach program in 1988.
I was living in the original Justice Via 6 and Gladys. This was spring of 1985. Homelessness was becoming an issue. Ted, Harry Rogers, and a bunch of other guys were there. Harry Rogers came out of prison and really did a lot to raise the issues of homelessness on Skid Row.
Go get a job. Go get a job. Hey, wait a minute. Look around. All these people up here that's running these missions. Fred Jordan was still around. We had Martha Brown Hicks. We had Andy Robeson. We had Maxine Johnson. Know what they were doing? They were hiring folks that already had places to stay, but they telling the homeless folks, go get a job. So my thing was, wait a minute. The only thing we know well is homelessness. So why don't we get some of them there good jobs you all got? And if y'all so damn smart, y'all can find a job somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right.
Everybody that knows me, this is a hell of a moment because I can't talk.
How you doing, girl?
All I can say is thank you. That's all.
Thank you.
That's a 2-minute movie. So, 4 or 5 years ago, the Animating Democracy folks at Americans for the Arts, they asked us to be involved in a study group, and they wanted us, we had picked different groups working in communities on different levels around the country, and they wanted to do something about, how, make a paper about how effective we were in doing what we did. And we and Maria Jackson, who was a researcher on the project, we really thought we weren't so interested in writing something about how credible we were, but rather we would sort of use whatever credibility we had to compete in the neighborhood and really look at where art came from on Skid Row. And so we ended up making this paper, which is, I have a couple copies and I have links to it. It's on the Americans for the Arts website. And it's called Making the Case for Skid Row Culture. And what we found out is that it comes up from the ground up. People just get together and they make music and they do whatever on their own pretty much. It's not really institutionally driven. And Maria, coming out of a social service, social science background, said, wow, if we just had some money, we could get a geographer and a research project. We could really instantiate where all this stuff come from, and we'd have something really credible as a next step. And so, of course we didn't have that money. So thinking in the small way, we thought, well, if we just get like 500 pairs of iridescent yellow sunglasses and write on them Skid Row artist menacing cool in the temple, and then we just give them away to anyone who self-identifies as an artist, and we have a festival connected to that where people can come and do their thing, then then we can amass a whole lot of stuff. And so, Austin, maybe you can talk a little about the festival, and then maybe you can talk about the latest result of the festival.
Okay, so every year we do a festival at Gladys Park. It's called the Festival for All Skid Row Artists. And basically what it is a weekend in the park, and we do we rent a PA system, and we set it up, and we put arts and crafts all around the park, and we have a set list that we create with all these different artists. And now it's been this is the 4th year that we just did. And there was tons of artists that were coming up and saying, hey, I want to get in, I want this slot, can I do, 2 days? And it was like, whoa, hold on, because there really were a lot of returning artists that came back, and the community has really come to appreciate the festival as a place to showcase and highlight their talents. And it also is kind of a slap in the face to anybody who says that Skid Row is just a place, that's just a wasteland, because it's definitely not. And I think that LAPD is always trying to prove that point, that it's not a wasteland, and that it is a community, and that it's not really just going to get pushed around, you know. So the festival was a great success this year, and some of the people that performed just blew it out of the park, you know. And there was like Tommy Newman and the LA Playmakers, you know. They're a group that formed in Skid Row, and a lot of them like play together at the church or whatever, but they knew that we were gonna do the festival again, and they were ready this year. They said that too. They were like, you know, when we do this festival this year, we're gonna be ready, and they were ready. And they brought the house down, and we actually invited them to come and perform at our Christmas party, which was really cool, you know, to have them there. So yeah, and then like we also make one of these little newspapers and pass them out in the community, and we interview all the artists, and you know, we ask them. Yeah, we make DVDs for them so that they can have a copy of their performance, and it's great. It's a great experience getting to know all the artists, and you know, now after this was my first year really like being helping organize the festival. And before, when I walk downtown, you know, I know a few people here and there, but now when I walk downtown, it's like I know everybody because I know all the artists, you know, in Skid Row, and it's like, hey, what's up, you know? So it's really cool. The festival really does a lot to bring the community together, and it's really
Yeah,
awesome.
If I could jump in
It's
real quick.
also a lot of mothers and fathers with children are coming to the festival. We also have all visual arts, and there's many creativity stations. So there are people that just sit there and draw, you know, for 2 days, and kids, and it's really becoming a real community event, which is really nice.
And one of the coolest things is that, you know, like all communities, Skid Row does have its warts, right? Ours are a bit more public at times. And so this park, there can be some hanky kind of stuff going on at times, but not because we're named LAPD, but because the community folks know and respect us and know us personally. On the days of our festivals now, the same type of stuff. I won't say that some of it ain't going on, but most of it is where people holding themselves accountable. They say, this is our thing, we're going to put our best foot forward, and so you don't see some of that negativity going on. I also want to say that Inner City Arts came out, and they did a children's station for us there. That was real cool. So it was a lot of good stuff, really, really cool stuff going on.
Yeah, and then the last thing is that just now one of the people, of the artists and also activists on Skid Row, General Jeff, came along. He also is a hip hopper, and he brought along a journalist from the Noisy Vice. It's a blog, and they wanted to write something about artist music on Skid Row, and they really had no idea where to start. So luckily they walked into our rehearsal space. And so we were like, you know, here's the newspaper, and you know, go to talk to this one. And then actually we have, John was talking about a database, we have 550 artists signed up over these 4 years, which is really amazing. We actually have the database now.
With you know, pictures of them, you know, pictures of their work, of individual work, or video if they perform.
Yeah, and we make a DVD with excerpts of each performance, which we give back to everybody that performs. And some people say, I want to have my whole performance, can you make a DVD especially for me? And we do that too. So, you know, it's really something that also people are into because it really helps them to promote their work. And of course, then everybody films their own performance. But then he did, so he went and looked up a bunch of artists that are on Skid Row, and it's this really nice article that I put on our Facebook page. Sounds of the Unheard, a portrait of musicians surviving on Skid Row, which is just super cool.
So, I guess, do we have another minute or two before we go into the discussion?
Yeah,
Okay, great. So, you know, we've been doing a lot, all that kind of stuff, and then once in a while, you know, we have to put our foot down about something. And at the moment, one of the things that's going on, Kevin and Ronnie Walker and some of the other people, and Joe Jeff was mentioned before, some of the other people in LAPD have been very active in one particular community issue that's going on right now. What's that, Kevin? It might turn into a show right now.
Yeah. Well, on my day job, I work at doing alcohol and other drug prevention in Skid Row. And what we try and do is help the community reach solutions. So we do what's called technically environmental prevention. Our issue right now has to do with one of the biggest housing providers in the community. Their newest venue, their newest housing project is on Main Street. And they get millions and millions and millions of dollars to provide in-home supportive services. Their mission is to provide housing for the chronically homeless, the mentally ill, and people new to treatment. There is a difference between treatment and recovery. Bottom line is, the bottom floor, because it's on Main Street, you know, 5th and Main, they want to put an alcohol serving restaurant. We just think that, we think it makes dollars, but it makes no damn sense. And that's the whole community's take on it. And so I'm part of DLANC, but DLANC is a rubber stamp for every new alcohol outlet. And we just decided, based on, well, personally, I've got a beef with it, but when the community kept saying, well, what about this and what about this? We stepped up to the plate. We appealed the first license. We were able to win, which was a big victory. We thought it was over, but they turned around, instead of having a full line of alcohol, now it's just wine and beer. But we're saying you're missing the whole point. Here's people that need support. They don't need an alcohol restaurant on the ground floor. And so we've been involved with that. I want to say that other artistic people have gotten involved. All of the experts, you know, human service experts are on our side. But their whole lineup is, you know, the financiers, you know what I mean? The developers is good for business. But is the revitalization of downtown Los Angeles, is it based on human resources or is it based on financial resources? So anybody that wants to join with us in this fight, we would welcome you, and that's what we're doing. That's one of the many things we are doing. But as we continue our own narrative, we're just finding and uncovering and discovering there's so many resources, you know. And so that's what LAPD does, and that's why I'm tied to them. Me and John are joined at the hip.
Kevin mentioned this hearing that, you know, like we happened last spring, where this appeals hearing, one of the LAPD members was the person who requested the appeal. But, you know, so many people from the neighborhood, like 40 or 50, many of them have been connected with one project or another, you know, came and spoke, you know, in a really compelling way, and the zoning person overturned the previous ruling and denied it on appeal. So, you know, so it was pretty great, and yeah, we're definitely thinking about making a show out of even that hearing, something about this issue. So I guess.
Do you want to show the last video, or do you want to?
We have a video which is really, you know, it's 2 minutes of 4 different shows, so it's 30 seconds of 4 different shows. We can do that. You know, don't get too bored, I don't think.
But show some of the international works we've been doing.
And neighborhood.
Yeah.
At this time, I will recognize from California's 35th District, Ms. Maxine Waters.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am here today to testify about the failure of the Central Intelligence Agency to conduct a serious and thorough investigation.
A major problem with the report, Mr. Chairman and members, is that the report cleverly refers to agents. But we should be talking about agents and/or assets. I'm going to say to you today in no uncertain terms, Mr. Adolfo Calero was a CIA asset. Many of the funds for aid would funnel through him.
I want to be absolutely clear to our people and the world. The United States does not torture. It is against our laws, it is against our values. I have not authorized it, and I will not authorize it.
C'est lutter contre la misère et l'ignorance pour pallier les manques de la médecine. On dit que c'est le travail des politiques.
On dit que c'est le travail des politiques, mais pas celui des médecins. Mais la politique, que fait-elle contre ces deux fléaux? Tu connais nos lois contre la misère et l'ignorance?
You know we can build and build out forever. I always need more. I always need more. Always more. Always more. Always more. Now we begin to see who the real addicts are. It's these builders. It's these developers. These financiers.
Thank you, guys. That was really interesting, and I'm sorry it's only, the time that we have is very short, but because I know we could talk all night about this work. But we are going to continue the conversation, and we're going to bring up a couple folks to engage with John in response to what we've seen here and to bring the frame, the first responder frame, into the conversation as well. So up is Mark Valdez, the Executive Director of the Network of Ensemble Theaters, and Leilani Chan, the Artistic Director of Theater Productions. Sorry, Leilani is out of the room, so.
Okay, Mark. Okay. Pressure.
Should we go in?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think what we're going to do now is just have a conversation, given the frame that Teresa posed at the beginning, and looking at the work that you all just talked about. Something that struck me was this frame of small theater, because when you talk about the work, it doesn't seem small at all. Like there's not a piece of it that seems small. Like you've got parades, you're closing on streets, you're publishing in a newspaper, you've got a database of 500 others. There's something about the scale of what you do. And I'm wondering if we can just talk about how a small theater is doing work on such a large scale.
Oh, that's a great question, actually.
No, actually, Teresa and I were talking yesterday on the phone, and you said about productions, you said, we never do anything small. We're a small theater, we don't do anything small. We only do big things.
Well, the note, I think also, as the conversation develops, I think in the series, that this notion of even using the term small, it kind of undermines what we do. It's not in the, I think what you're pointing out to some extent is that it's not really accurate. Small is, and here's my line. Small is, as most of you know, it's a term that describes a budget size, usually. It can describe a venue size. So they're terms that have, we used it in the subtitle because it's shorthand But the more I've been working on this process, this project, the more I realize that small perhaps is something that does in fact undermine us in many, many respects. So anyway, that said, I don't want to take the dais over, but I think it's a very interesting inquiry. And that's partially why the first responder frame, kind of grew out of this notion of, is there a better way to frame what we do? Because the diminutive, small, is inaccurate.
I think for now that I have to formulate an answer, I think what I was saying earlier, the more we've got interested in sort of working on a different narrative of the whole neighborhood, and we've started thinking more and more about projects that include the whole neighborhood. When we do, and even if we're just doing a show on stage, we try to figure out all these other ways to have events that happen before that, events that happen during it, events that happen after it, the newspapers, all this kind of stuff, so that it becomes open to part of the community experience in a way bigger than just going to the show, not going to the show. And so I think that's an element of our bigness.
But there's also something about, I think it was something Kevin said, which was, when you pointed out the difference between human resources and financial resources. And I think this is something, I think what these organizations do, organizations like LAPD or Rock Productions or is being able to marshal human resources. Like it's undercapitalized, it's underfunded, without a doubt. I think there's an argument, but abundantly resourced.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
I mean, there is a motivation that's relative to that, but it's sort of, not to put it up front in terms of the undercapitalization of this kind of work, and that, why is there a need for us to do the reframing? Well, why are the arts still the smallest part of the philanthropic pie? Why did a few weeks ago Governor Jerry Brown try to, or attempt, or propose to cut the California Arts Council budget? It's 2014. What, in a sense, is wrong with this picture? Is there a way to reframe the work and the value of it so that perhaps in the long term, the undercapitalization can turn around, perhaps? And perhaps, that's, it's not to say that we are survivors, right? We have, by hook or crook, gathered in our human resources to do the work. It doesn't mean, though, that we wouldn't necessarily enjoy having more resources to do the work that we would want to do. We wouldn't necessarily want to change the scale at which we're doing it, which is medium to large, or in direct engagement with our communities. We wouldn't want to change that necessarily. It'd be great to have more resources. And that's what I meant in the description, in the definition, about the fact that it's a choice to remain at a certain scale so that you can have that direct engagement. Otherwise, you are cut off from the community in a certain kind of way. And it's not to say that there isn't value in
being cut off from the community. We know there's a lot of value.
It's not necessarily to pit what we're doing against another strategy or way of working or another scale or whatever. It's just different. It is what it is.
Well, I think what you said about, what you read at the beginning about hospitals versus community clinics, I mean, that says a lot. And I think it's something that also Kevin talks about a lot, well, he didn't tonight, but it reflects this whole zoning fight about the liquor license that the nonprofit is trying to get, is that, as nonprofits become bigger and bigger, are they still the responsive organizations they were before, or do they become something else and sort of lose what made them really, vital and inspiring in the first place. And so I think that's really important. And the other thing I would say regarding what you said, it's not like we're going to come up with some, we're going to come up with some notion so people will then say, oh, I see you guys aren't really that small and you're really important and we're going to change everything. It's really, everything is a constant push and shove, right? So, we're going to make this case tonight, and then we're going to make it again tomorrow, and then we're going to make it again, and we're going to keep making the case, as other people in this room are doing, in a continual way. Because other people are going to keep dismissing it, and seeing their value, focusing on something else. So it's not something that, it's wrong to think of it as something that we're going to, reach the final, get to the final victory in this discussion. We just have to keep it going.
I know. Well, I mean, I'm just in talking about preparing for today. One of the things that TIADA is doing to respond to our environment has been to release ourselves from the need of ticket sales. And I think that's like, you know this already, but I mean, it's revolutionary for a theater company to even consider that. We actually have a year this year where we're not selling any tickets, except maybe when we're on tour. And that evolution kind of came to us naturally over the last 6 or 7 months. We've been doing a strategic planning process, but at the same time, the projects we got funded for were projects where we were engaged with the community more. And we were dealing with this issue of like, but we want to involve participants more and participants in the community more. And one of the communities that we started working with last year was restaurant workers. And that naturally came to us because most people know our work around working over the last 10 years. We've been developing Refugee Nation, which is based on stories from Laotian refugees in the US. But that's taken us around the country, and we actually never got a chance to do it in Los Angeles until last year with the help of LATC and Chantal, who's here. And when we did that, we really wanted to take our residency process that we're able to do in other cities back to LA, and we're about a 15-year-old company, and as much as we do that residency work outside of the city, we have a really hard time doing it here in LA because we're tiny fish, like we're huge in Anchorage, Alaska. Like we know the name. We're on the front page of the Anchorage News, the Daily News, and in Minnesota, the theater community knows my name. But here in LA, who's TIADA? Who's Leilani? So, and it's also hard to connect with community here because we're all so spread out. And those communities are struggling to organize themselves as well. And so it's not as easy to come in and work for a week and really make an impact. And even though we've been here for 15 years, it's still been a struggle. But when we came and we did our show, Refugee Nation, we were like, okay, well, we were doing it at the Latino Theater Company, so how can we connect with Latino communities to let them know that there's a lot in common with refugee communities in the Southeast Asian community. And in that process, we did workshops with Rock LA and restaurant workers, and it was revolutionary for both organizations because there were so many refugee stories from restaurant workers. We had people in the room who were Salvadorian refugee workers. We had someone who told a story of crossing the border himself from Mexico. So then our relationship with the restaurant worker community grew, and now we're working with restaurant workers. And Corky was our first director, and Kimiko was in the ensemble last year when we tried to do the same process, but we felt that the biggest challenge was we couldn't get restaurant workers to commit to a 10-week process. And then our funder was in Santa Monica, so we had to do the show in Santa Monica. So getting to Santa Monica, and then our hours as theater artists are the same hours as restaurant workers. Nights and weekends is when restaurant workers come to work. So we actually had an ensemble member who quit his job to be in the show. And on the one hand, we were like, oh no, don't quit your job. But on the other hand, he's like, no, this was a process I had to go through, and being in the show gave me the power to say, I'm an artist, I have other things to do. I don't need this job. He was in a bad working situation. But in this year, doing the project, we're like, we don't want our ensemble members to all have to quit their job and to be in our show. So how do we then start releasing ourselves from our aesthetic need to have lots of rehearsals? And So I'm challenging our artists this year to have one workshop and one rehearsal. And any preparation that you have to do, like people can commit to like coming to more rehearsals, maybe 4 times if they want to. But there's levels that the restaurant workers can participate in, whether they show up the day of the show and maybe we find a way to have them be audience participants, whether they come to the workshop in the show, like we're experimenting it and it makes us really nervous, but at the same time it's really exciting. So.
And that's typically, like, you know, not unfamiliar to you, right?
We worked for a long time. But no, that's very cool what you're doing. I think that's wonderful. I mean, it's really cool. Yeah, but we also, like, you know, like when we did state of incarceration here, for example, if someone drifted in at the last minute, then we might, you know, say one line in the show, and we just be in the show, rather than not be in the show because we've been working on it. So.
Because it's itself its own kind of responding, right? It's its own kind of first response.
Yeah, as you said, our shows are usually free, and or if, on the occasions when they're not, like when we did Utopia Dystopia at Red Cat, there was a code word for anybody from Skid Row.
So free doesn't necessarily connote any value in that sense of, you know, like, you know, when you pay, you know, some folks feel that if you pay a certain amount for a ticket, you know, that constitutes what the value is going to be, that it's a direct correlation, right? And a lot of this work is free, or very low priced, or it's underwritten so that it can, you know, and so that free doesn't connote the value, right? There's other measures that in a sense we use to connote the value. The engagement with the community, the process that we've been in with the folks that are either involved directly or indirectly in the work. That value is, again, something that, or that process, I should say, is something that directly relates to the welfare of that community. And that's where the value lies, to a greater extent. But it's translating that, I think, to, you know, the world that we're in. Like you're saying, you know, it's really a new paradigm for you to say, well, we're not going to base our value on the price of our ticket sales.
Yeah, because that's a real process for a theater to, you know, we do these, like even last year we felt really good about the production we did, and we got a great review, and we got a pick of the week in LA Weekly, but audiences were just so hard to get in there, and so you feel like a failure when you feel like you have a good production, but you didn't sell those tickets. And yes, there's the monetary budget issue, but it's also you feel like a failure. And I just, like, no one loves us. We work so hard. But also realizing that the communities we want to reach are not going to the theater. It's not part of their culture. It's not part of their practice. And if we really want to work with immigrant communities or communities that don't go to the theater, how can we go to them? So we're really experimenting with how do you make it a plus? So I mean, we're experimenting with doing pop-up theater events, like kind of like the pop-up restaurant. We're doing the pop-up theater events, and what could those be? Christina Wong's working on something that might go viral and then culminate in characters showing up at a Ciclavia or a Diner LA or somewhere. We don't know. Like we've actually dived into workshops not having a performance date set, which is scary to us. We always have that set, you know. So, and then we also have actually Alison de la Cruz and Dilo working on a piece around gay, lesbian restaurant workers, LGBTQ restaurant workers. And that process actually will take longer because no one's really looked at restaurant workers in Los Angeles in the queer community. So perhaps that piece might actually be about making a safe space in a restaurant to talk about gender issues and gay, lesbian issues. And then Shamla is working on movement to see if we could maybe go to a high road restaurant that exhibits fair labor practices and sick days and pays workers for sick days. And what can we do around, what does a restaurant look like when people are treated properly and treated well? But again, she's a choreographer, so one, rehearsal, but how do we make it a positive? And one of our collaborators actually came to us through Rock LA. She's more of a visual artist, and she had already collected a lot of immigrant stories. And so what she did was, she actually put her piece on us as a practice, and then she went to Cerritos College and basically brought the back of the house, which if you didn't know, in restaurants, the back of the house, like in theater, the back of the house is the kitchen. And the front of the house is, of course, where the patrons are and the waiters. So the front of house staff are the waiters and the host and the people you see, and back of the house is the chefs and the cooks and the dishwashers. So in her piece, she brings the back of the house to the front of the house. So the culinary students were at tables, and we were coming and showing them the heavy labor that actually goes into working in the back of the kitchen, layered in with the stories of immigrants, possibly undocumented workers, who are there making their food. And so that was really exciting because at the end of it, we switched places. So we got them out of the seat, and they ended up scrubbing a pan while we sat there and pretended to be the clueless customer. So anyway, we're turning it into a plus, trying to find a way that it's not about us sacrificing our aesthetics or putting a participant on stage that can't act, but putting them in a way that they look good at what they're doing, and they look like an expert, and they look like a performer.
Well, that might be a good place to transit. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Molly. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just curious about how you all come to the content of your work, or to like the ideas that you want to investigate. Because, at one point you mentioned, John, that it comes from the ground up, and it seems like similarly there's a responsiveness to the community that you're working with, and so how did those conversations inform what you all do?
Yeah, I think I alluded to it earlier. I think a lot of times, the next show or something like that we're going to do comes out of something that showed up in it while we were working on something else, and then it sort of, it had juice in the room and in the community, and so we said, okay, we're going to work on that later on. So now, when we were doing, that's happened a number of times. So I think when we were doing Biggest Recovery Committee Anywhere, which was about recovery on Skid Row, then there was a lot of conversation one day about mental illness, I think. And then the next show we're going to do is about sort of community mental health and people who are really taking charge of their own, living with mental illness and making sure that they get to do everything they want to do for themselves and not be doing. So yeah, sort of one thing comes out of it.
It comes in the it's organic, I'm thinking actually of our other project, Global Taxi Driver, which came out of touring and being an artist in communities and really finding that the taxi driver is not the person you think they are. They're always, you think that they're your native informant and they're the one who's going to take you and show you their city, and you find out, well, they've probably been there for 2 months or maybe 2 weeks, and they also have refugee stories and in their country that they came from, they were a rebel fighter, or they were a lawyer, or they were a doctor. So I got really interested in these taxi driver stories. And I've been now doing that for maybe couple years now, of collecting these stories and trying to figure out how do I dramatize these stories. But then recently, of course, there's the whole thing with the apps to Lyft and Uber. So people are using their own cars to drive people around, and that's created a tension, of course, between taxi drivers and just us people with cars who want to make some extra side money or create this community. And I was resistant to even talking about that, but finally, organically, in the last month, now I feel like the piece is about taxi drivers might be a dying occupation. And so now my piece has another twist to it, I feel. We're in the process of creating it, but it feels like there's another twist to it in that, well, what if I approach this is an occupation that might disappear because software companies are taking over taxi companies. There's actual litigation where software companies are saying that they're they don't have to operate in the same way that taxi companies have to because they're a software company. So they're not, the regulation doesn't apply to them.
So I was going to say, before you asked that great question, just to transition a little bit into a bit of a Q&A, but I was going to say that the next symposium, one of the topics we want to grapple with is this tension between, or the negotiation in a sense, between the so-called professional work and the community-based work, or as you alluded to, the aesthetics of that versus perhaps the aesthetics of the other, or how are they integrated or not integrated? What does that mean for us as professional theater artists? And that's a whole subject in and of itself, but we are going to try and tackle that in the next symposium, which I'm sure you're all dying to know, is in the spring. We're laying these out one every quarter through the end of the year. So the next one will probably be in late April, and we'll all let you know about that. But I thought it would be great to open this up before we go into we're going to take a break in a minute and go into small groups. But if anyone has a question for any of the panelists, yes, Tomas.
I was just curious to ask John, and I'm making the assumption that there's a research process, but can you discuss the role of research in the development of your pieces? I mean, what kind of aspect is at play as you develop it? You talk about, out of a conversation. And I love the model, which is that you've got this topical resource for creativity, but you've got this conversation about mental health. And so when you go from conversation about mental health to presentation to dramatize issues, where does the research fit into that?
The question is, where does the research fit into the development of the theatrical ideas and the artistic ideas? Is that somewhere else?
Pretty much.
We're trying to get everything on mic because we're videotaping and we're going to be posting a lot of this video online.
Yeah, well, it depends on the piece, of course. But in a piece like for example, well, in a piece like the mental health one, which we haven't made yet, there's a lot of the stuff we do, we like to have lived expertise and combine that with bona fide expertise. And that could be whether we're doing so in this case, we would rely on the lived expertise of the people who are in the project and who come in and are involved as creators. And then we would also, get with, not only read stuff, but get with people who are we already have, we know and interact with people who are sort of pioneers in community mental health and all the stuff that, that was sort of built from the ground up when it wasn't funded by the government when the mental institutions were closed down and stuff like that. So we put those two things together, and with, and a lot of time, and in other projects, a lot of times, we'll do research by, reading stuff, but also going to hearings, hearings that happen. If look in Utopia Dystopia, for example, which was about the future of the new downtown, we reenacted part of a city council meeting. We did a lot of on-street research. We went and applied for lofts. We did a lot of different levels of research.
Yes, Angie?
I'm wondering, one of the things that strikes me is this word small that you had alluded to earlier, and I'm just wondering from your own experience of being in the field for so long and thinking about your peer companies as well, what about the smallness is conducive to being that kind of first responder art making? I mean, is it chicken and egg? I mean, are you forced to be small because the environment doesn't support this kind of first responder? Or is it because there's something about being small that allows you to be a first responder in a better way?
I can't summarize that, but
I try to speak loud.
But it's very,
Is there something about being small that allows you to do the work better? Yes?
I bet they call
Yeah,
it
and
that.
also the chicken and the egg notion that, are you remaining small? Are you small at the beginning and you remain small because it's working for your process? Or are you forced to be small because of the notion of small and how you fit into a certain budget category, and so you can only ask for a certain percentage of your organization's budget, for instance. Does small keep you small?
Or is it intimate? And is it intimacy in the work?
I think,
Not an either or, but.
Yeah, is that part of it? Is small related? I mean, it's not necessarily just one thing. But I think to the larger, the larger community, the community at large, small does mean the diminutive, but I think that there is more value that we can attach to it, which I think is sort of part of the question. So, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, speaking to just one part of that question, which has a lot of different layers, is that I'm amazed that we have that people, that we have the amount of resources we do have to do what we do. I think, first of all, we pretty much, do whatever we want. I was thinking about earlier when Terrence, before Terrence had a medical emergency and he was going to be in your role, we were once on a panel, some other panel, Terrence was moderating, and one of the other people there was from the philanthropic arm of Boeing, and someone in the audience, it was a different audience, someone in the audience asked, because I think the other people were very, very large organizations in town, and me, I had a little kids table at the end, and so they asked, somebody asked, well, what happens if you lose your funding from Boeing, for example? And they said, oh my God, and I said, well, if we lose our funding from blah blah, then we just go try and find funding from somebody else, because we're not, we don't have anyone we can rely on in a big way other than the obvious, city, county, state, NDA kind of things. And so we aren't really beholden to anybody, unfortunately. We would love to be beholden to somebody, but we're not. And so we also, we ain't afraid in that way either of not fulfilling the expectations of somebody whose expectations might be different than what we want to fulfill.
For us, I think on the one hand, small allows us to be agile, so that we can change from our organization, change from doing a season to now doing what we're doing now. We can shift when we want to shift. But at the same time, here we are working with organizers who are fighting for minimum wage, and organizers on taxi cab drivers fighting for healthcare. And if I really sat down and wrote the hours that I and my staff and my artists work, I don't know if we even meet those standards. So, and at the same time, this community work takes so much more time, I think in larger institutions, they call it audience development, it's marketing. But for us, it's a long relationship. It's we worked for 10 years with the Malpede community, and we're never leaving. But that work took 10 years for us to get to know people, to trust us, for us to really know the history and the many layered politics within that. So really staffing that, and paying that in the way we would like to be able to do that. We might not even grow as a company, but I would like to be able to pay staff salaries so that could be done with a lot more skill and grace than we're able to do it.
There seems though, because I think this is basically the reality of scale and size and budgets and I think what both of you talked about was that you're in the room. Too often for that audience engagement thing, it's a department that is doing the audience engagement. It's not the organization that is doing that engagement. And you all, the organization, does the work. It's not a function of an office. It's not a function of an employee. It is the function of the mission. It is the function of the organization and everybody that comes in. And I think that there's something about scale that mandates that you work that way, just because that it won't get done otherwise.
I think it also manifests in quality. Like, for example, if you have going back to the other, Tomas's question, if you have a dramaturg doing your research, and then the dramaturg just tells the actors, the result of the research, that's very different than hanging out 10 years in the community, and then putting, and being able to, what you're going to put out there is so much deeper, so it's a real, there's some real disadvantages of going big, and that's
What you said earlier, John, which was that you value the work of those in life experience commensurate or equal to the expertise.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that changes the nature of creativity as well.
Yeah.
And that's based, you've got the scale to work within that.
And how much is it? It's just like the artist impulse. As the artist, that's what you want to, that's the work.
That is work, yeah.
That's the fun part.
Yeah, really. Exactly.
Can we take one more question? Oh, no, Nicole, and then one more back here, and then we're going to have to move on, but we're going to get into more conversation in smaller groups, so I have a
just thinking that isn't the whole idea of first responder anyway, meaning that you're stepping into territory that's unexplored, and that it is that inspirational or spontaneous thing you say, this needs to be done. So naturally, it's going to be a small beginning. It's a small fire. It's not a huge fire that you're starting. It's a small idea that you start with, and it takes time to develop. Like spending time in the community, spending time meeting people, talking, and getting that the bigger thing underneath it. Because to stay in a community like you have in the LAPD for over a length of time, you can't buy that. There's no fast way to do that. And there's no big way to do that either, I don't believe. It's got to be that day-to-day contact that works.
The building of trust.
The building of trust. And just what we did after 9/11, started working with interfaith communities. That came as an exterior situation, and we responded to it. And but where was the funding for that? There was no funding for that at that moment when it needed to be done. There was no funding for it. But if you didn't do it, then who are you? What is your work?
So you did it anyway, in other words. And then did you build on that, though, as the piece developed, so that,
We did try to build on it, but we just worked on a very small scale. So we worked with a community for a year and a half to build a piece. We did do a piece with players, but we did it for 3 days, and 900 people saw it. But those people, because of their need for Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and Christians to come together and try to understand what was going on, fast together, etc. Though that process that we went through, there was a need there. It was to stick us together for that long to do.
And that is the work.
And that's the work.
That is the work.
How you grow your soul.
Sometimes the culmination is just, it's symbolic of the process, Any other comments before we go to this last question? Okay, thank you.
I really liked the analogy that you made of first responder theater companies being like the small health clinics in our communities. And I'm curious if you were to extend that analogy further, what is the relationship between the health clinics and the hospitals? And thus, what is, what could be, or what should be the relationship between the first responder theaters and then the larger arts organizations?
Can you say the verbs again? What could be?
What is, what could be, or what should be the relationship between first responder arts organizations and larger arts organizations? And we're meeting tomorrow to talk about it.
Yes. Thank you, Sima. Hi.
Hi.
That's Sima Sueco, a new member of our community at the Pasadena Playhouse. Say hello to her. That's a loaded question. It's a good one. Mark, you I mean,
Okay, well, how does it work between community health clinics and hospitals? If you have a good relationship, if the community health clinic has a good relationship with the hospital, they can, they can pass clients, they can get clients specialty care that they can't provide themselves, for example. They have, and they can draw on some of the resources of the larger hospital to better serve their clients, right? So okay, help me beyond that.
Well, as an example, I mean, we've had About Productions has had a very viable relationship with larger institutions. We're nomadic, and all the companies here are nomadic. There's going to be other examples as we go on of companies that have venues and they're entrenched in their community because they have real estate there, and they act in a different way. They have other ways to reach out to that community, but because we're nomadic, and that's been our MO for 25 years, it's allowed us to also make institutional bridges with institutions that do want to work with us, not take advantage of us, but work with us. So our missions are similar. The work that we produce coincides with the work they're producing exhibition-wise or whatever it might be. But ultimately, we're producing it. We are raising the money for it. They're providing a lot of in-kind services. So, but there is a very healthy relationship. So I would say, that's one of the positive examples of the possibilities.
Going back to where you started, because it's interesting, because in the healthcare, in the clinic hospital analogy, it's about the patients. The institutions, it's not about the institution. It's not about either the clinic nor the hospital. It's about the patient. And if you like, in these conversations, it's about the organizations, and we forget about the patients. Like what's not being factored in is the audience. Yeah, and so in that model, a clinic, it's great because it's less intimidating, it's quicker, you get an immediate response, they listen, you might have a better relationship, it's more convenient. But there are times where you have to go to the hospital. Like you have to. And so I feel like I don't know where I'm going with this.
I mean, there is a certain kind of wealth in the hospital that doesn't exist in the family clinic.
But it's not even wealth, it's like they can operate on you in the hospital. They have that expertise.
Because of the wealth that they have in their institution, they have all the right, it's like if you need the machinery, go to the hospital, right? If you need that kind of care because the severity of whatever, that's where you need to go. Yes.
Well, I was just going to say that when Mark, when you started to talk about the patients, the difference between the audiences is vast because the subscriber audience in a large theater, is predominantly, a wealthier, homogeneous group of folks who come to see that kind of theater. And then first responder small theaters generally are, we're talking about not charging people and coming into the community to bring folks who aren't used to coming into the theater. So it's an interesting notion to try to think about, then are these the same people? Or how do we then, can the people from the community in the small, being served by small theaters, come to the big, or can the audience, does the audience from a big theater want to come to see the other? I don't know. I wonder if it's the same people. Or can we make it? Can we cross?
I think that there's some of that sort of rumbling in the edges of like TCG, right? They realize that their audience base is not in perpetuity, and this other work is being done, and how does that invigorate what they're doing? How do the relationships, are they copacetic or not? How do we, So there's a lot of rumblings, and it will be interesting to see, how those relationships develop and if they can in fact enhance each other's abilities to do what we do. You know. Let me go to Armando real quick and then Suma again, and then we'll probably have to move on.
I think the analogy sort of falls apart because the hospital is a first responder. If we take first responder literally, like the ambulance comes to your home to respond to your need, it takes you to the hospital, not the clinic. And so we don't really serve the same purpose. Is there maybe room for the kind of work we do as first responder theater companies on that larger scale? That would be the hospital.
Yeah, like if you think about Twilight Los Angeles at the taper responded to the needs of the people to deal with the riots at the time, you know, and that work that can be done on a large scale, but the audience is still different. And the thing that's in the room is like those audiences are literally dying because they're old, you know, primarily white audiences, and the big theaters know that, and they do want these audiences because they need their dollars. They're not going to be free at the big ones, you know, so it's an interesting dynamic, but I agree that the analogy sort of is a tough one.
Right. Okay, look. Yes.
I'm an actor, so I'll be loud. In San Francisco and in the Bay Area, they do a better job of overarching between bigger and small theaters. One, bigger theaters have costumes and technical things that we could never afford, that they're kind enough to loan. They also do overarching funding. They do shared advertising campaigns where it's like Art Week and they put together all the theaters and they do the printing and they do the promotion because they have the money for that, and then the smaller theaters benefit. There's access to expertise. For example, you're building a set or you have a makeup issue or something, you don't know how to handle it. There was always resources where you could go to San Francisco Opera. They were very kind about making those kind of things available. That's not the case in Los Angeles. You can scratch at the door of the music center and they might give you a $20 ticket. And other than that, you're on your own.
I mean, since we're talking about CTG, since the labs closed, I mean, I know that's almost ancient history at this point, but since the labs closed, there was, I remember, there was a new artistic director coming in and saying, well, where do I start? Trying to make it small. I think what I saw happening was more of a cultural appropriation relationship with smaller theaters, and especially theaters of color. So instead of developing through the lab, they put the onus on artists themselves to develop their work and small companies to develop their work. And we all know that developing work takes most of the money and risk and no of the income back, right? You just spend it and you develop it and one piece works and 4 other pieces don't. And this carrot of, oh, then it'll be produced at CTG. Well, that happened with a couple companies, but it felt more like cultural appropriation than a partnership like you're talking about. And I mean, I remember with Dog Eaters, it was such an amazing show in SIFA in a tiny little room, but when it went over to Kirk Douglas, what actually happened was the seasoned subscribers hated it, word got out, and there were actually empty seats, and the community couldn't even buy those seats, and these performers had to perform for empty seats. So it's just, I don't know.
I just want to go back to Armando's point. We're not necessarily saying that hospitals don't provide resources in first responder work. You know, anybody can be, you know, do first responder work. You can be of any size, shape, or form. The notion is that the clinics dot the landscape, and that collectively they do a certain kind of work that the hospitals don't do or can't do in the way that these smaller theaters have the agility and the mobility and some of the things that we talked about do. And so it's kind of trying to look at the collection of this work and to see how as a body of effort and you know, what's the word I'm looking for, but basically the body of work that's there as a collective. How does that have value? Because the hospitals do not have to make a case for the value, what their value is. Whether they do first responder work or not, right? They don't have to make the case for their value. But we do. We have to make the case for it. And it's becoming more and more viable and more necessary for us to be doing the work that we're doing. We're holding in some cases, look at John's book. He's holding a community together. So with that, I'm gonna interrupt. Seema, okay. So because we have to move on, we want to get you in small groups. We're going to have you create your own groups of 5 or 6 people. Yes, but I want to introduce Alison De La Cruz, who is going to be a facilitator for this next. She's an independent, community-based, multidisciplinary theater artist, and her background is very rich. Being a facilitator is only one of the things she does. She's a playwright, she's an activist, she's an administrator. You can name all the things, you know. And she used to work with About Productions directly, and she's back and home with us tonight.
Hi. So we have, our goal is to get everybody out by 9 o'clock, and we want to give you all an opportunity to keep interrogating these questions and not to stir the pot more. But when I heard your question, Armando, it made me think about, well, the reason some hospitals or small clinics don't have to do is because there's preventative care ahead of time. So how do small companies provide the preventative care for our communities? Like, I wonder those things. So what we're going to do in these small groups is give you each an opportunity to really wrestle and think about this framework of first responders. Is that working for you? What resonates, and what is this thing that doesn't quite fit? Among the things, and I was just trying to capture questions and statements as they were coming so that the rest of the symposia can benefit from these questions that we're really wrestling with. So I have a couple folks in the room. I know that you've all been sitting for a while, and I just want to acknowledge that. So we're going to kind of try to take care of each other and ourselves as we move into this next part. So the task part that I need from you is we're just going to break up into 8 groups. Most of them will have 6 people. There may be a group or 2 of 7. There are a couple folks that I've asked to each lead, so I'm just going to ask us to just count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think that's the easiest and fastest way so that people aren't stuck like, I don't want to go over there. No, let's just break. If in this transition after we break, you need to use a bathroom or get a beverage or do something like that, you can do that quickly and then phase yourself back in after you understand the area where your small group will meet. We're going to give you as much time as we can, and then we're going to come back and do a really quick report out.
In which case. Okay, so there's not a lot of time as we want to honor the 9 o'clock out, but I do want to give each group about a minute and a half to report out.
All right, so in looking at the idea of the first responder frame, we really sort of grappled with what that means and who the first responders mean, and we realized that one of the main responders in our community are the schools, and that that's where a lot of things show up first, and we've had people who can reflect on how that works, and that some of the first responder work is very immediate, but it's about responding to that idea of the spirit and the things you can't say at home, or necessarily the things that you can't have tended to. Sometimes that different kinds of theater companies respond to different kinds of emergencies in that first responder sort of way. And sometimes a community doesn't know they're a community, they don't know their voice, they're a bunch of individuals who don't necessarily know that they're not alone, and that's something that theater is uniquely positioned to do, is to help people share their stories, find community, connect to other places. Similar, someone in our group noticed the similarity between the conversations about being in a theater company or being in church, and that idea of community and the way those things come together. And that a lot of times society sort of gives us ways and places to be, so like a student might know that I'm going to be in elementary, and then I'll be in middle, and then I'll be in high school, and there's a path laid out, and that not everybody connects to that path, and not everybody finds that as their way to belong, and that if you are small, you can have an intimate relationship to your community without having to feed a large institutional infrastructure that has its own needs and it needs its own attention and its own resources, and it's really hard to feel resourced if you're small. But that there are some things that that intimate relationship really allows you to do. So there's many different ways to see the same thing, but that's the work that we see happening in our community.
Awesome.
Beautiful, thank you. I'm just going to come next door. Who would like to?
Come on, thank you.
So we started off with just like our general responses to the idea as small theater companies as being a first responder. We had a pretty positive response to it. We supported this idea. Talked a little bit about being a community artist. That's the definition, you are in the community, you have a pulse of the community. You can respond first because you are in some way living these needs in the community. And that sort of close relationship. And we also talked a little bit about ways that larger organizations can also be these community artists, can also be these community organizers, and that one of the challenges of larger organizations is the way that their departments are siloed, right? Sort of divvy up the responsibilities that different people have, and not everybody's job is connected to the same mission. And that there are ways that larger organizations can be more about consensus building, can be more community focused, can reach out to community as community organizers. We also talked about if you are organizing within community, if you're organizing community arts, how to reach beyond the borders of whatever you define your community for other collaborations and for other partners, whether they be other artists to collaborate with, our colleagues, or somebody with expertise that will be beneficial to you, or with resources, with support, with money. And how do we broaden our conversation out of our small community to make these partnerships work?
Yay!
Beautifully put. I'm coming to you. Who's going to take it?
Well, I would say, where to start? I would say we had a very mixed and not entirely positive response to the first responder frame. This idea, there was discussion around the difference between responding to an emergency situation and stopping, intervening, as opposed to a feeling of actually of a wellness center or a wellness clinic or a wellness organization within a community, which is creating a space, a safe and facilitated space to bring what is in the community, rather than stopping it or interceding or responding in some emergency, stop it up. So there was a lot of, that did not resonate really equally with us throughout. I would also say, so there was a lot of discussion around that. We kind of stuck around the first responder framework. It was also around what is this the conversation that we need to be having? There's also around the smallness of the theater. Well,
help her. If you
Yeah,
want to
what's-
help.
Maybe as well, I think one idea also was because people are doing work in so many different ways on a small scale, it's helpful just to know what people are doing and how people can link or support each other's work, or even join on certain things.
Yeah, definitely. There was definitely
as part of this group's work.
Thank you.
does. It's somewhat similar in terms of what the dynamics that you all, because we were responding to the idea of the framework, for me, it was the idea of the word small and what is small, and we talked a little bit about that and who we are in that context. The analogy that was given for us was, that we talked about, was this pyramid idea of that the larger institutions like opera, ballet are at the top of the pyramid, and those who work in the communities are at the bottom of the pyramid. And it's that idea of looking up and looking down, but if we were to turn the pyramid on its side, then we all are equal and on the same level, playing together. And so we kind of like bantered that around and looking at ways to try to look at that notion of being put on the side, if you will. The idea of first respondents that come into play, that for the most part, those who are doing the work are there before the first respondents. They're there in the community before this idea of somebody coming to help them out. And so then what is that? That idea of that we're there first and that we're working towards that end, right? I put in the idea of the front line and working in the trenches is what we do. Self-determined. Can we pick our name, or is this the term that we're going with in terms of what we're trying to do here? And if so, then we can just probably go beyond that and just get to the actual work at hand and what it is that we are discussing. But that was something that we were stuck on a little bit, was small and first responders in that sense. We all know that we want to give voice to the people, and that to those who don't have the voices. We talked about that, you know, sometimes some larger themes will give an opportunity to groups to perform and do things. I think Leilani, who brought up the Dog Eaters production in that sense. So it comes down to the audiences, and perhaps that maybe there was a night that's dedicated, that it is free to the community, and that it's published within their brochures that there is a night that's free to the community that's going to be involving the smaller theaters doing or presenting or something is an idea. And there was a time that Center Theater Group used to help out small theaters with costumes, because I was working there at one point, and I remember working within the communities and people coming in and getting costumes. So there was that, but that's not there anymore. Finally, the hospitals. It was mentioned that we choose to go to the theater. We don't choose to go to a hospital initially. And so what is that all about in terms of bringing the community to us? What came to mind really quick to me was the community-based theater companies that involved the community within their performances. Obviously with LAPD. That's one. I think of Cornerstone. I think the work that I do with young people, that if we involve young people in the work, their parents will come to the theater. And so it's like, how do we get our audiences? So anyway, that's it.
Lots of good stuff to think about. Here you go.
Good luck, be great.
Thank you. I'm going to be supported. So, well, I think when we looked at the first idea, some members of our group were asking the question, I mean, just again, what is the definition? What does that mean, first responder? And we sort of were talking about the issue of responding to the issues of the community that were arising. But what we noticed was, we talked about that, you know, we looked back at that notion of the time it takes, that really a lot of the companies that we're talking about here are people who are taking up residence or starting a relationship with the community, and it's not so much responding to an emergency as it is taking the time to get to know the community and then have those issues become clear and then responding. So, you know, and we also talked about, along with the time, we talked about like the, in Westwood, what was that called?
Persians.
The Persians, like, and maybe you should speak to it, but how, you know, she was trying to do a project with noticing that in Westwood, all the folks who lived in Westwood didn't ever go to those Persian stores right on their own street. And that when she was trying to get to know the community of the Persian stores and the Persian people there, it took so long for them, again, it was that thing. to build trust is a long process, and that was something that really we were discussing, and the value of it. And then we talked a little bit too, I think, about process versus product, which again, we were touching upon with, with is the culmination just, is a way of sharing the work, but do we value the process as much or more than the culmination and the performance, and shifting our idea about what is the value and, stuff like that. What else did we talk about? That's pretty much it. And how different companies are, do it differently a little bit, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for taking this time.